Find a comfortable position. Let your body settle into its weight. Allow your breathing to even out. There is no destination to reach tonight, no arrival to consider. The journey has already slowed. The path will carry itself. When you are ready, we begin. Tonight's story is called A Gentle Journey Across Open Prairie Lines. The land opens before you without announcement. There is no gateway, no marker, no sudden clearing of trees. One moment the horizon is modest, contained by a low rise in the earth, and the next it stretches outward in a long, unbroken line that meets the sky with quiet certainty. You stand beside a narrow rail line that threads its way across the prairie. The steel tracks rest on weathered timber ties, their surfaces catching the late light in thin, steady reflections. The metal is warm from the day's sun, though the air has begun to cool in a way that feels gradual rather than abrupt. The prairie does not rush outward, it settles. Grass extends in soft, uneven waves on either side of the track, rising and lowering in response to the wind. The movement is small, rhythmic. The blades lean together, pause, then ease back upright. Nothing sharp, nothing hurried. A long fence runs parallel to the rails a short distance away. The posts are spaced evenly, each one angled slightly differently, shaped by years of wind and shifting soil. One post leans just a fraction more than the others, its top smoothed by time. A single nail near its base sits slightly raised, catching a faint rim of light. The sky holds a pale gold near the horizon and softens upward into a cooling blue. There are no heavy clouds, only a thin streak here and there, stretched lightly as though brushed across the air. You take in the scale without needing to measure it. The openness does not overwhelm, it steadies. The ground beneath your boots feels firm but forgiving, dry earth pressed flat by seasons of heat and rain. A few small stones rest along the gravel shoulder beside the track. When the wind shifts, they make the faintest sound as one nudges another. There is distance here, not the kind that demands crossing, but the kind that simply exists. Far off, the land dips slightly before rising again in a barely perceptible swell. The shift is so gradual it feels like breathing. The prairie inhales as the light lowers. It exhales as the wind passes through. A faint hum carries along the metal rails, almost too quiet to name. It may be the residual memory of a train that passed hours earlier. Or perhaps it is only the wind moving across the hollow length of steel. The sound is steady. You rest your hand lightly on one of the fence posts. The wood is dry and faintly ridged beneath your palm. Its grain runs in thin vertical lines, softened by weather. There is a small indentation near the top where someone's hand has rested before, smoothing the surface over time. The post does not shift beneath your touch. The wind gathers again and slides across the field. The grass bows in one direction, then eases back. The motion repeats, never precisely the same, but always similar enough to feel familiar. There is no sense of waiting. The track runs straight toward the horizon, narrowing gradually as distance takes hold. Its parallel lines appear to meet at a vanishing point far beyond what the eye can hold, yet the convergence is only illusion. The rails remain evenly spaced, no matter how far they extend. You follow their direction with your gaze, then let your eyes soften. The prairie does not require focus, it holds itself. Somewhere beyond the low rise, a bird lifts once from the grass. The motion is brief, a flicker against the sky before it settles again. The sound of its wings is faint and contained. The air carries a hint of dry earth and late sunlight, a warmth that lingers close to the ground. As the day thins, that warmth rises gently and blends with the cooling air above it. The transition is gradual. You shift your weight slightly, feeling the subtle give of the soil beneath you. The movement is small, enough to remind you of your presence without interrupting the stillness. The fence line continues past you in both directions, its posts repeating at measured intervals. The pattern creates a quiet rhythm: post, space, extending farther than your eyes can comfortably follow. There is comfort in repetition that does not demand attention. The light lowers another fraction. Shadows lengthen from the fence posts and stretch across the grass in long, softened angles. They do not darken the land, they simply add dimension. You draw in a slow breath, though not because you are instructed to. The air moves easily through you. The openness seems to widen that space inside your chest, as though the horizon has gently expanded your own boundaries. The wind shifts again. This time it carries a faint whisper through the dry heads of grass nearest the track. The sound is light, almost like distant paper turning. You remain beside the rails, neither walking nor standing rigidly. Just present. The prairie extends. The track continues. The sky lowers its light with patient ease. There is nothing here that insists on change. Nothing that signals an approaching moment. Only a long, steady line of land meeting sky, and the quiet suggestion of movement that never breaks the calm. The openness settles around you the way evening settles over a field, not suddenly, not dramatically, but in increments so small they are almost imperceptible. You are within it now, and the horizon, wide and unbroken, holds its place without strain. You remain beside the rail line a while longer, allowing your gaze to travel without urgency. The prairie does not offer a focal point in the way forests do, or towns, or coastlines. There are no clustered shapes to rest upon. Instead, the land offers continuity, a steady unfolding that carries itself outward in every direction. It feels expansive, but not empty. There is something reassuring about ground that stretches this far without interruption. It does not hide anything. It does not conceal sudden changes. It simply extends, quiet, and even beneath the lowering light. The rails beside you hold their line with patient precision. Their surfaces reflect the sky in thin, muted streaks that grow softer as the sun eases downward. Between the ties, small tufts of grass have pushed up over time, bending easily when the wind gathers strength, and then lifting again as it passes. A grasshopper shifts somewhere near your boots. The movement is brief, a small rustle through dry blades before stillness resumes. The sound does not travel far. The air feels broader than it did moments ago. It is as though the sky has lifted a fraction higher, making more room for breath. The temperature continues its gradual shift, not cold, not warm, simply settling into evening balance. You take a step along the gravel shoulder beside the track. The stones respond with a faint crunch, then return to silence. Your pace is unhurried. There is no station ahead that must be reached. No timetable pinned to the inside of a carriage door. The rails run on whether you walk beside them or not. A faint shimmer appears along the horizon where the land dips slightly before rising again. The light catches that gentle swell and lays across it in a thin, pale band. It looks almost like water at first glance, though you know it is only distance bending light. The illusion fades as your eyes soften. Wind passes again, this time carrying a slightly different tone, a lower note as it moves through the longer grass nearer the fence line. The sound is even, contained. It does not rise sharply or fall away abruptly. The fence posts continue their patient repetition. Post, space. You notice that one of them bears the faint remains of an old marking, perhaps a number once painted there, now worn thin by weather. Only the suggestion of it remains, a pale outline against the wood's faded grain. There is something quietly enduring about objects left in open places. They do not demand attention. They simply weather, soften, remain. You pause again, letting your attention widen rather than narrow. Far to your left, the prairie opens into an even broader stretch where the land dips more noticeably. The line of the track curves there, only slightly, just enough to follow the contour of the earth. The curve is gentle. It does not disrupt the sense of continuity. The sky has shifted further now, gold thinning into softer tones. The light feels less direct, more diffused. It touches the rails without glare. It rests on the grass without brightness. A small insect brushes briefly against your sleeve before drifting away. The contact is light enough to barely register. You allow your shoulders to lower another fraction. The land does not move quickly here. Even the wind carries itself with measured calm. When it passes through the field, it moves like a slow ripple across fabric, lifting one section, then the next, never disturbing the underlying stillness. The rails hold their quiet hum. It is not loud enough to call attention to itself, only steady enough to feel present. Perhaps it is simply the metal cooling as evening approaches, releasing the warmth it gathered during the day. You take another step and then another. The gravel remains consistent beneath your feet, small, rounded stones shifting slightly and then settling again. Each movement produces the faintest response, contained within a narrow radius around you. The prairie does not echo, it absorbs. The horizon continues to stretch, unchanged by your movement. It does not draw nearer. It does not recede. It remains where it has always been, a quiet meeting of earth and sky that does not require interpretation. You turn your gaze upward for a moment. The first faint hint of evening deepens in the upper sky, though there are no stars yet visible. Only a gradual darkening that moves so slowly it feels almost imagined. The wind softens once more. The grass settles. The fence line stands in patient alignment. The rails run forward without interruption. You stand within the breadth of it, neither small nor large against the landscape, simply present. There is no demand here, no signal, no approaching sound. Only the long, steady line of prairie and the suggestion that it will continue long after you have turned back from the tracks. The light lowers another shade. The horizon holds, and the openness rests around you with quiet assurance. The rails continue ahead of you, twin lines set with such quiet certainty that they seem less constructed than simply revealed, as though the prairie always carried this path within it, and the metal only traced what was already there. You begin walking beside them, not on the ties, not balancing along the steel, but along the narrow strip of gravel and grass that runs parallel. The ground yields just enough to remind you of its texture without asking for careful footing. Each step settles into the small stones and lifts again with an easy rhythm. There is something companionable about walking beside a railway line. It suggests direction without demanding pace. The prairie widens to your right, stretching in long, tawny folds where the grasses gather and part again. To your left, the fence continues in patient increments, its posts evenly spaced, wire drawn taut but relaxed in its long reach. The land does not resist the rails, it accommodates them. A faint warmth still lingers in the metal beside you. When your fingers hover near one rail, not touching, simply resting close enough to sense, you feel the memory of sunlight held within it. The heat is subtle now, thinning with the lowering day. The sky has begun its slow descent into evening. The brighter tones soften first, edges rounding where cloud meets light. The colors shift not dramatically, but in layers, pale gold easing into muted amber, then into a softer, more diffuse glow that touches the grasses without sharpening them. You notice how the rails respond to this change. They no longer gleam, they absorb. Their surfaces darken by a shade, so small it almost escapes attention, yet the shift is steady. The line remains clear, but less reflective, less insistent. A breeze moves across the prairie again, this time carrying the faint scent of dry earth and something slightly sweet, perhaps wildflowers hidden among the grasses. The scent is not strong enough to isolate, only present enough to suggest itself before thinning again. Your pace steadies. Heel, roll, lift. The repetition forms easily, unforced. There is no need to adjust your stride. The land beneath you remains consistent. Gravel gives way to firmer ground in patches, then back again to stone, but the transitions are smooth. Far ahead, the rails converge toward the horizon, narrowing into a fine, almost invisible point. The perspective holds its quiet illusion, drawing the eye forward without pulling the body with it. You are not traveling somewhere. You are simply moving within a place that already exists in full. A faint mechanical hum seems to linger beneath the stillness, perhaps the memory of a train that passed earlier in the day, perhaps only the wind sliding through the tension of the wires. It is not loud. It does not build. It rests there like a low thread woven through the air. There is something reassuring about that hum. It implies connection without urgency. You pass a small junction marker set low beside the track. The paint has faded from it, leaving only the faint outline of numbers that once guided movement here. A small chip has formed at its edge, revealing the metal beneath. The imperfection is unremarkable and complete. The prairie does not correct such things, it lets them weather. The light lowers another fraction. The grasses nearest you shift from warm gold to a softer, more neutral tone. Their movement slows as the wind eases, each blade returning to upright and holding there. You find yourself adjusting your breathing to match the openness. Inhale, the air feels broad. Exhale, it moves outward without obstruction. There is no wall to meet it here, no ceiling to press against. The sky above remains vast, though it no longer feels bright. It feels settled. A distant bird call carries once across the field, clear and contained. It does not repeat. The sound arrives, rests in the air for a moment, and then dissolves into the wider quiet. You continue along the line. The rails run over a slight rise ahead, following the gentle swell of the land. You approach it without anticipation, noticing how the horizon shifts as you move, the far grasses rising just enough to obscure a portion of sky before dipping again. The perspective changes slowly, never abruptly. As you crest the small rise, you notice a weathered wooden sign set back from the track. Its lettering has worn thin with years of exposure. Only fragments remain, a curve of a letter here, the tail of another there. The meaning is no longer legible, yet the presence of it feels sufficient. There is something quiet about objects that no longer insist on clarity. They simply remain. You pause briefly beside it, letting your hand rest near the edge of the board without touching. The wood carries a faint texture, grain lifted slightly by time. One small notch sits near the lower corner, perhaps where a tool once struck it, perhaps where someone leaned too heavily long ago. The detail is minor. It holds. The prairie stretches outward on both sides of you, unchanged by your pause. The rails continue forward with the same calm precision. Nothing shifts because you stand still. You resume walking. The sky deepens further now, color thinning towards softer blue-gray tones. The first suggestion of evening shadow gathers at the base of the grasses, though no darkness has fully formed. The rails begin to cool. Their surface reflects less of the sky and more of the land, becoming almost matte in the fading light. You notice how the space between the ties forms a quiet pattern beneath the steel, wood, gravel, repeating without emphasis. The rhythm is steady, but not intrusive. There is comfort in repetition that does not demand attention. A low wind returns, brushing across the prairie in a broad sweep. This time it carries a cooler edge, hinting at the night that will follow. The grasses respond in waves, rising and settling in long, coordinated movements that travel across the field before fading. You watch the motion without tracking it. The horizon remains open. The line continues, and the path beside it holds you easily within its quiet progression. The path continues without announcing that it continues. You do not notice a beginning or an end to this stretch of ground, only that your steps remain steady and the rails remain beside you, unwavering in their alignment. The sky has shifted again, almost imperceptibly. The brighter colors have withdrawn into something softer, more diffused. The prairie no longer gleams. It absorbs, it gathers the light into its fibers and holds it there. Your pace remains even. There is no need to hurry toward the distant convergence of steel and sky. The rails are not leading you anywhere in particular tonight. They are simply present, a quiet parallel, a stable measure. You pass a small switch lever set low beside the track. It rests in its position without tension, its metal slightly dulled by years of handling. A faint scratch runs along its side where tools once brushed it. The mark is subtle, nearly hidden in the fading light. There's something reassuring about mechanisms that are at rest. They feel complete even in stillness. A breeze slips through the open field again, thinner now. It moves across your shoulders and then beyond you, flattening a narrow band of grass before it releases and rises again. The motion travels outward in widening arcs, like breath moving through a lung too large to see all at once. You slow slightly without intending to. The rhythm of your steps adjusts, settling into a quieter cadence. Gravel presses underfoot, then eases away. The ties beneath the rails hold their spacing with dependable regularity, wood, gap, a pattern that never insists on attention yet continues without interruption. The prairie smells different now. The warmth of sun-baked grass has given way to something cooler, more mineral. A faint trace of iron lingers near the rails, almost indistinguishable unless you pause long enough to notice it. You do pause, not to look ahead, just to let the air rest. In the distance, a single fence post leans slightly off its line, tilting a fraction more than its neighbors. The wire attached to it dips gently, adjusting to the change without strain. The imperfection does not disturb the long reach of the boundary. It adapts. There's something steady about structures that allow small shifts without breaking. You resume walking. The light continues to thin. The rails no longer hold warmth. They feel cooler even at a distance. Their edges soften against the dimming horizon, becoming lines that suggest direction rather than command it. A faint mechanical hum passes through the metal, so quiet it might be imagined the echo of distant movement miles away, perhaps another train far beyond the visible curve of land. The vibration does not travel strongly. It is more suggestion than sound. You notice it, then it fades. The prairie remains vast, but it no longer feels expansive in a way that stretches outward. Instead, it feels enclosing in its openness, as though the wide sky and broad field create a kind of gentle boundary, holding you within their scale. The rails dip slightly as the land slopes down into a shallow hollow. The change in elevation is minor, but you feel it in your calves, in the slight adjustment of balance. The gravel shifts differently underfoot here, smaller stones rolling more easily before settling again. You move through the hollow without altering your breath. Inhale, exhale. The air is cooler now, brushing lightly across your skin. The grasses along the low stretch are taller, bending inward toward the track as though listening. Their tips graze the lower edge of the steel when the wind leans them far enough. A small ripple of sound travels through them, a dry whispering, contained and brief. There is no need to interpret it. Ahead, the rails climb gently once more, rising toward another long line of horizon. The sky has begun to gather its evening tones, muted blue deepening towards slate, a faint trace of amber lingering near the far edge of land. You notice how the scale of everything remains consistent. Nothing surges, nothing recedes. The prairie does not change dramatically from one stretch to the next. It shifts by degrees, by texture, by light. A narrow wooden platform appears ahead, no larger than a few steps across. It sits beside the track, weathered and slightly uneven, perhaps once used for loading small freight long ago. The boards have darkened with time. One plank carries a faint crease where repeated weight wore it down. You step onto it without hesitation. The wood answers with a soft, contained creak, not sharp, not startling. It simply acknowledges your weight and then steadies. The sound feels complete. You stand there for a moment, looking outward across the open field. The rails stretch on in both directions, equidistant and unwavering. The fence line parallels them with patient symmetry. The sky lowers another shade. There's something about standing beside a railway that suggests continuity beyond sight. The lines disappear into distance, yet they are undeniably connected to places you cannot see. The thought does not pull you outward, it simply rests there, quiet and factual. You step down from the platform and return to the gravel path. The mechanical hum does not return. Instead, the prairie grows quieter, as though the air itself has softened. The grasses move less frequently now, their motion slowing as evening approaches. Even the scent of earth feels lighter, thinner. Your footsteps remain measured. The repetition does not build into mantra. It remains practical, grounded, step, settle, lift. A faint glint appears on one rail where a narrow thread of remaining light catches its edge. The reflection is brief, almost accidental. It disappears as you move past. The land ahead looks unchanged from the land behind you. There is comfort in that. You are not crossing into something unfamiliar. You are walking through continuity, a stretch of earth that has held these lines for years without drama. A single bird crosses overhead, its wings beating once or twice before it glides toward the darker edge of sky. The silhouette is small, contained, and then gone. You continue beside the rails. The light lowers further. The prairie holds its breadth, and the rhythm of walking carries you forward without demand, without destination, simply alongside the steady line that remains. The land does not shift dramatically as you continue. It alters by nuance, the density of grass, the angle of shadow, the way the horizon seems to draw slightly nearer as the light lowers. You notice a shallow indentation in the gravel beside the track, perhaps where a boot once paused longer than intended. The stones there are pressed flatter than the rest, their edges worn smoother by weight and time. The mark is not fresh. It has simply remained. There's something steady about impressions that do not demand to be understood. They exist. That is enough. The rails carry a faint residue of warmth from the day, but it thins quickly now. If you were to rest your hand against the metal, it would no longer feel sunlit, only cool and quietly present. The steel does not resist the change. It releases heat without ceremony. A narrow line of wind travels low across the prairie, touching the tops of the grasses first, then slipping downward toward the roots. You can see the movement long before you feel it. It advances like a gentle tide through the field, altering nothing permanently, only rearranging surfaces for a moment. When it reaches you, it is lighter than before. The air settles again almost immediately. You continue along the line, and the gravel beneath your feet adjusts with each step, a small crunch, then stillness. The pattern never grows louder. It remains contained, as though the land prefers to keep its sounds close to itself. A distant fence post carries a thin wire looped once around its top. The loop is slightly uneven, one side drawn tighter than the other. The detail is small, nearly indistinguishable at first glance, yet it holds the lines securely in place. Even small asymmetries can maintain stability. The sky has shifted another shade. What was once amber has cooled toward a muted silver blue. The prairie reflects it faintly, absorbing the color into its long sweep of grass. Your steps remain even, the rails remain parallel, and the stretch of land continues without urgency, without conclusion, simply present in its widening quiet. The prairie continues in long, deliberate lines. The rails draw forward through the open land, their parallel edges steady and unhurried, catching what remains of the light in thin, muted glints. They do not rush toward anything. They simply extend a quiet agreement between steel and distance. You remain beside them. The grasses shift in broad, low movements now, less like waves and more like breathing. A faint alteration moves across their surface, a thinning of air that presses and releases without force. The sound is subtle, a brushing, a gathering, a soft settling again. The land does not hurry to evening. It eases into it. Far ahead, the rails seem to narrow until they meet the horizon, though you know they do not truly meet at all. It is only the way the eye translates distance, compressing space into a thin seam of light and line. That seam remains steady, even as the color around it deepens. You walk without effort. Gravel shifts beneath your feet, then finds its level again. Small stones lean against one another, adjusting into place as weight passes over them. Nothing resists the adjustment. The ground has known footsteps before. There's something reassuring about land that has already absorbed so much movement. The prairie stretches outward on either side, unbroken by buildings or fences for long spans at a time. In the distance, a cluster of low posts marks a boundary that does not interrupt the view. The posts stand evenly spaced, their shadows lengthening into narrow lines that run parallel to the rails. Light lowers another fraction. It does not drop suddenly. It thins. The sky at the edges of your vision grows cooler first, a pale wash of silver blue spreading from the horizon upward. The remaining warmth gathers closer to the west, narrowing into a softer band. The air carries a faint scent of dry earth and sun-warmed grass releasing the day. It is not sharp. It is not strong. It simply exists, a trace of warmth that lingers as the temperature shifts. You pass a wooden mile marker set low beside the track. Its numbers are faded, the paint worn thin by seasons of wind and dust. A small crack runs down one side, stopping halfway as though it decided to rest there. The marker remains upright. So do you. The rhythm of walking becomes less about steps and more about continuation, a steady exchange between foot and ground, movement and stillness. There is no destination pressing forward, only the line beneath you and the open land unfolding alongside it. A faint hum travels along the rails, almost imperceptible, like a memory of vibration rather than a present sound. Perhaps it is the cooling metal adjusting. Perhaps it is wind moving through distant ties. The source is not important. The hum does not grow louder. It simply remains for a moment, then thins into quiet again. The grasses on the far side of the track are slightly taller, their tips catching the last of the light. The difference is small but visible, a subtle shift in texture, a faint darkening near the base where shadows have already gathered. You notice the way shadow does not fall evenly across the prairie. It gathers first in low places. It settles where the ground dips slightly, forming soft pools of dimness that widen gradually. The higher stretches remain pale a little longer, holding onto brightness as if remembering it. You continue along the rail line. A small pebble rolls from beneath your step and lands between two sleepers. It makes a muted sound, a brief click against wood, then comes to rest. The sleeper beneath it shows faint marks from years of weather, shallow grooves where grain has lifted, and settled again, tiny indentations where metal once pressed. Old wood keeps a kind of patience. The sky shifts again, almost unnoticed. The warm band near the horizon narrows further, the silver blue spreading upward and outward. The prairie reflects the change without resistance. Its color deepens, greens turning toward muted slate. The air cools gradually. You can feel it first along your forearms, then across your neck, a gentle exchange of warmth for something lighter, clearer. There is no sharp edge to the change, only a steady recalibration. The rails now reflect less light than before. Their surfaces grow darker, absorbing what remains instead of casting it back. The long lines continue into distance, steady and unwavering. You walk beside them, not to arrive, but to remain within their direction. There is something calming about parallel lines that do not cross. They hold their course without deviation. A faint flicker of movement passes through the grass to your left, not sudden, not startling. Perhaps a small animal adjusting its position or wind altering direction briefly. The grass bends, then lifts again, leaving no clear trace of what moved within it. The prairie does not insist on explanation. It allows motion without narrative. Your breathing aligns gradually with your steps. Inhale as gravel shifts. Exhale as your foot lifts again. The rhythm forms naturally, without intention. It holds for a few cycles, then shifts slightly, adjusting as the ground changes texture. The sleepers beneath the rails appear in regular intervals, dark rectangles set into pale gravel. Their spacing creates a subtle visual rhythm, repetition without monotony. Each one bears small variations. A deeper grain line, a darker patch where moisture once gathered, a faint notch worn into one corner. Repetition does not mean sameness. It means continuity. The horizon remains wide and open, no buildings interrupting the line where sky meets land. A thin band of cloud rests low in the distance, barely visible, its edges dissolving into the cooling light. The wind moves again, slower this time, traveling across the prairie in a broad arc. It does not press hard. It shifts the tops of grasses gently, drawing their surfaces into soft diagonal lines before letting them fall back. The rails hold steady. The prairie continues. You notice how the weight of your body feels slightly different now, lighter in the cooling air, less tethered to warmth. Your steps remain even, but the effort behind them has thinned. You are not walking toward anything. You are walking within something. The sky deepens another shade. The silver blue grows more pronounced, the last warmth nearly absorbed. The land reflects this quiet transition with patience. A distant post stands slightly angled compared to the others. Its tilt is subtle, noticeable only if you pause long enough to compare. The wire attached to it holds firm despite the angle, stretched taut across the open field. There is stability even in slight imbalance. The gravel beneath you grows marginally darker as light recedes. Small stones that once caught the sun now blend into muted tones of gray and charcoal. The path remains visible, but softer at the edges. You continue. The sound of your steps blends into the wider quiet, no longer distinct. It becomes part of the landscape, another subtle layer in the prairie's ongoing rhythm. There's something about open land at this hour. It does not close around you. It expands inward instead. The rails stretch forward, dark and steady, absorbing the final light of day. The sleepers form their measured pattern beneath them, and the prairie breathes in long, unbroken lines on either side. The air settles, the light lowers further, and you remain beside the quiet geometry of steel and grass, moving through a landscape that does not demand attention, only presence. The rails continue forward without comment, their surfaces now holding only a faint memory of brightness. The prairie does not resist the shift, it receives it. You notice how the space between each sleeper feels more pronounced in this dimmer light, not because the distance changes, but because contrast softens. Edges blur slightly. Shapes ease into one another. A low breeze passes again, this time cooler. It does not push. It threads through the grasses and along the metal lines, slipping through open space without effort. The tops of the prairie plants lean in a single direction for a moment, then find their upright stance again. The land does not cling to movement, it releases it easily. You continue beside the tracks, aware of how the repetition of steps has shifted from conscious rhythm into background motion. There is less counting now, less noticing of each individual stride. The body has found its level. The sky above deepens into a more uniform tone, the silver blue smoothing into something darker, but still open. One faint star begins to appear near the upper edge of your vision, not bright yet, only a suggestion against the cooling air. It does not demand attention. It simply arrives. The rails beneath it seem even steadier by comparison, fixed lines against the slow drift of sky. Their direction remains clear, unwavering. There is comfort in that clarity, even when nothing is being pursued. You pass another stretch of prairie where the grasses grow slightly shorter, their texture finer. The sound changes subtly under the breeze, less of a broad brush, more of a faint whispering across thinner stems. The variation is small but present. Even in sameness, there are shifts. Your shoulders lower a fraction without instruction. The weight they carried earlier, subtle, unnoticed, has thinned with the cooling air. Arms hang more loosely. Hands relax against open space. A faint metallic ping sounds from somewhere along the rails as the temperature drops further, a single, contained adjustment as steel responds to evening. It does not repeat, it does not echo, it simply marks a quiet recalibration. Metal remembers the day, then lets it go. The horizon now holds only a narrow trace of pale light, almost indistinguishable from the rest of the sky. The prairie beneath it darkens into layered tones, depth increasing as color reduces. You continue walking, not toward the narrowing light, but alongside it, within a landscape that stretches without boundary, where line and breath and cooling air move together in steady, unforced rhythm. The rails continue beside you, their presence no longer sharp in your awareness, but steady, a quiet geometry beneath the widening sky. The prairie has settled into deeper tones now, the golds and pale greens of late afternoon folding into muted bronze and blue-gray. Nothing has vanished. It has only shifted register. Your steps adjust without instruction. The rhythm remains. A low fence appears briefly to one side, thin posts set at long intervals, wire drawn between them in straight, patient lines. One post leans slightly, not dramatically, just enough to suggest the slow work of seasons. It does not look broken, only weathered. There is something reassuring about structures that remain useful even as they tilt. The grasses thin near the fence line, revealing bare patches of earth where the wind has pressed more insistently over time. The soil there holds a deeper color, cooler, and darker than the surrounding prairie. You notice how the breeze changes sound when it passes across open ground, less whisper, more hush. A single bird call lifts somewhere far behind you. One note, then silence. The sky above continues to deepen, and the first star you noticed earlier now stands more clearly against the darkening blue. It does not flash, it steadies. The rails beneath it reflect only a faint residue of light now, a thin suggestion rather than a gleam. Their surfaces hold the last of the day without trying to prolong it. Steel does not cling. You move alongside them, not tracing their length with your eyes as closely as before. The need to monitor direction has eased. The body trusts the line. Your breath finds a lower register, not slower in any forced way, simply lower. The air carries a cooler weight now, settling across your skin with a softness that feels less like warmth, and more like evenness. You pass a small wooden sign beside the track, its paint long faded, lettering barely visible in the dim light. One corner is chipped where something once brushed against it. The damage is small, contained. It does not interfere with the sign's purpose. It remains. The prairie widens again beyond it, uninterrupted. The horizon feels farther now, though the land has not changed shape. It is the light that alters perception, thinning the visible boundaries between one stretch of earth and the next. There is no edge here that demands attention, only continuation. A faint ripple moves through the grasses ahead of you as the wind shifts direction slightly. It travels in a broad arc, bending the stems in sequence, then easing them upright again. The motion is neither urgent nor abrupt. It passes like a thought that never fully forms. You feel it too, not as pressure, but as temperature adjusting along your arms. The rails produce another small sound as they cool, a subtle contraction, metal answering the absence of sun. It is almost delicate, a reminder that even solid things respond to change. You have walked far enough now that distance has become abstract. The prairie does not measure itself in miles, it measures in breadth and horizon. Your steps grow quieter on the ballast between the sleepers. The stones beneath your feet hold less heat. Each contact feels more muted than before, less defined. The body adapts without needing to catalog the shift. A thin cloud passes across the high sky, briefly dimming the emerging stars before clearing again. The darkness returns untroubled. You notice how the rails seem darker than the ground now, thin lines cutting through the deepening tones. Their straightness is no longer striking. It is simply present. There is something calming about lines that do not waver. The prairie remains open on both sides, vast but not overwhelming. The scale feels expansive without being disorienting. You remain within it easily. Your shoulders settle further. The breeze lowers again, becoming less directional and more diffuse. It does not travel in obvious currents now. It rests across the land evenly, like a blanket drawn lightly over wide space. Somewhere in the distance, perhaps miles away, there is the faintest suggestion of another sound, not identifiable, not close. It fades before it can be named. The land does not hold on to echoes. The light continues to recede until it exists only as a pale suggestion along the furthest edge of the horizon. The sky above grows darker, and more stars begin to appear scattered, unhurried, emerging without fanfare. They do not compete with one another. They simply hold their positions. You move beneath them, alongside the rails, no longer orienting by daylight. The direction feels internal now. The tracks guide without instruction. The prairie surrounds without closing in. Your breathing deepens again, the inhale widening slightly as the cooler air moves through your chest. The exhale lengthens without effort. The grasses around you have grown quieter still. Their earlier whisper has softened into near silence, interrupted only occasionally by the faintest rustle when a slightly stronger current passes through. The fence line has long since fallen behind you. The open prairie now feels uninterrupted, horizon to horizon, line to line. You become aware of how evenly the rails lie across the land, despite subtle undulations beneath them. The engineering is precise. The sleepers hold their spacing. The ballast supports each section without visible strain. There is steadiness in that repetition. The stars above multiply gradually, not in clusters, not in bursts, just one then another, then several more across the breadth of sky. The darkness deepens, but not abruptly. Evening never rushes, it settles. Your steps feel lighter now, though the ground has not changed. It is not weight that has lifted, but attention. Less effort is required to remain within this motion. The prairie does not ask anything of you. It offers space. A final faint line of brightness slips below the horizon entirely, leaving the land in full dusk. The rails no longer reflect light. They absorb the night quietly. You continue beside them, not as someone traversing distance, but as someone moving within a vast and steady field, where repetition soothes, where scale expands without pressure, and where the sky above and the earth below find their balance without announcement. The rails continue to hold their line in the dark, and though you no longer see their full length, you sense their direction, a quiet certainty threading forward into distance. The prairie has entered that hour when edges soften but do not disappear. Shapes remain, but their outlines loosen. The grasses appear less individual now, more like a single surface breathing under the night air. When the wind moves through them, the motion travels in slow, wide bands rather than in sharp ripples. You walk within that movement, not cutting across it, not separate from it. The ground under your feet feels more uniform. The scattered stones between the sleepers no longer demand careful placement. Your steps have found their measure. Heel, ball, lift, a rhythm that belongs to the body more than to thought. Somewhere behind you, a long stretch of prairie lies undisturbed. Somewhere ahead, more of the same. The line continues. It always has. There is something deeply reassuring about infrastructure that does not hurry. A second bird call reaches you from far to the left, softer than the first, almost absorbed by the open air before it finishes. It does not echo. The prairie does not trap sound. It allows it to thin and disperse. Your breathing follows that pattern. Inhale, broad and even. Exhale, widening, then easing into the surrounding space. A faint shift in temperature touches your forearms as the night settles more fully. The warmth stored in the earth has thinned, replaced by an even coolness that spreads rather than presses. The air feels clearer now, almost weightless, and the scent of dry grass lingers just at the edge of awareness. Not sharp, just present. The rails emit another small sound, a delicate metallic adjustment as they continue to cool. It is subtle enough that you might have missed it earlier. Now, in the deepening quiet, it feels like part of the prairie's own language. Nothing about it asks to be interpreted. It simply marks the passing of warmth into night. You notice how the stars above have grown brighter as the sky darkens further. Their light is steady, not flickering, not dramatic. A soft scatter across an immense ceiling. You do not need to count them. The horizon has nearly dissolved into shadow, yet it still holds shape, a long, level seam between earth and sky. That seam feels less like a boundary now, and more like a meeting place. Your steps continue alongside the tracks, and there is no sense of needing to arrive anywhere. The act of walking has become the whole of it. A thin strand of grass brushes lightly against your ankle before bending away again. The contact is brief, almost incidental. You do not react. The body registers and releases. The rails beside you no longer gleam. They rest within the night fully, dark lines against darker ground. Their certainty does not require visibility. It is enough that they are there. The prairie holds you in its wide, unbroken quiet. The scale is expansive, but not overwhelming. It feels less like standing at the edge of something vast, and more like being held within something continuous. You continue walking. The rhythm remains, and the open land, now fully given to night, carries you forward without demand, without urgency, without any need to explain itself. The rails continue forward into the dark, and you continue beside them, not as a traveler with destination in mind, but as a presence moving within something already in motion. The prairie at night does not fall silent all at once. It settles in layers. First, the sharper sounds recede, the quick rustle of small creatures in dry grass, the occasional wingbeat. Then even the wind lowers, no longer moving in visible waves, but in softer currents that slide across the land almost imperceptibly. You feel that shift along your sleeves, a light brushing, a thinning of air that carries less heat and more openness. Your steps remain steady. The gravel between the sleepers shifts faintly underfoot, a small crunch that belongs to you and no one else. The sound does not carry far. It disappears quickly into the wide night. There is something comforting about that, the way effort dissolves so easily here. You are not leaving marks that need to be read. You are simply moving. The rails beside you hold a residual warmth if you were to touch them, though now it would be faint. Earlier in the day, they would have absorbed sunlight and heat, storing it quietly within their length. Now that stored warmth has begun to ease away, given back to the cooling air. There is something patient about metal. It does not resist the change. It does not cling to what it held. It releases in its own time. You walk a little closer to the line, not out of need, but out of a subtle inclination to align. The parallel stretch of steel feels like a quiet companion, a steady presence that neither leads nor follows, but continues. Above, the sky deepens further. The last memory of dusk has faded entirely. What remains is a wide field of dark blue, almost black, scattered with stars that appear sharper now. Their light feels less decorative and more structural, as though the sky itself is lightly stitched with brightness. You tilt your head slightly upward. The scale does not overwhelm, it widens. There is no sense of being small here, only of being proportionate. The prairie extends outward in all directions, but without edges, it feels less like distance and more like continuity. The land does not end abruptly. It transitions, it eases, it stretches beyond what you see and remains calm in doing so. Your breathing matches that wideness. Inhale, a long, steady draw. Exhale, a release that spreads outward. Somewhere far off, so faint you almost question it, there is the suggestion of another sound. Perhaps wind moving through a stand of trees at the far boundary of the prairie. Perhaps the distant hum of something mechanical, too far to identify. It does not intrude, it belongs. You become aware of the way your shoulders have lowered slightly since you began walking. The muscles along your neck no longer carry the faint upward tension they held earlier. Even your hands feel less engaged, fingers loosening within their own natural curve. The body finds its own level. A sleeper beneath the rails bears a subtle crack along one edge, not new, not dramatic, simply a mark from years of bearing weight and weather. You notice it as you pass, the way one might notice a line on a familiar face. It does not diminish the structure. It speaks of endurance. You move beyond it, and the pattern resumes: rail, sleeper, gravel, grass. A repetition that does not feel mechanical, but rhythmic, like breath repeated over and over without ever becoming identical. The prairie wind rises slightly again, not stronger, but broader. It moves across the grasses in a long, cohesive sweep. Even in darkness, you sense the shift in texture, the faint brushing sound, the soft bending and returning. There is no urgency in that movement. The land is not trying to reach anywhere. It is simply expressing itself in air. Your steps slow almost imperceptibly, not from fatigue, but from a subtle alignment with the quiet around you. The rhythm elongates. Each footfall lands, settles, lifts. You pause for a moment, not stopping entirely, but letting the pace ease further. The sky above seems larger now, or perhaps your attention has widened to meet it. A star near the horizon brightens briefly as a thin veil of high cloud passes and thins. It is not dramatic, just a slight shift in clarity. A small reminder that the sky is not fixed. It too is moving in ways too vast to track. You do not need to track it. You return your gaze to the rails, which now appear almost as two dark strokes against the prairie floor. They do not gleam. They absorb the night fully, carrying only the faintest suggestion of light along their edges. Your body continues forward. The gravel beneath you forms a consistent surface. and you notice how even its unevenness has become familiar. Earlier, you would have chosen each step more deliberately. Now, the body adjusts automatically without commentary. There is a kind of trust in that. The prairie carries its own sense in the cooling air, dry stems, earth that has released the last of the day's warmth, something faintly mineral rising from the stones. It is not a strong scent, more an atmosphere than a smell. You breathe it in without effort. It is neither sharp nor sweet. It is simply the land. Another small sound travels through the rails, a delicate contraction as temperature shifts further. It is almost like a sigh, though quieter than that. You imagine the long lengths of steel adjusting, finding their alignment again within the night's cooler hold. There is no drama in it, only continuation. Your steps resume their earlier pace, though the sensation of walking has changed. It feels less like covering distance and more like participating in a pattern: rail and step, gravel and grass, breath and sky. You begin to sense less separation between the line you follow and the path of your own movement. The rails continue forward without decision. You continue forward without thought. The prairie does not distinguish between the two. A faint ripple touches the tall grass to your right as a slightly stronger breath of wind moves through. It travels in a slow diagonal band, bending stems and releasing them again. In the darkness, you sense the motion rather than see it, a shifting of texture, a soft shushing sound that moves from one point to another. It passes. The stillness returns. You do not hurry to fill it. Your breathing has grown deeper without you intending it. The inhale expands gently through your ribs. The exhale lowers, lengthens, eases. The body is no longer anticipating. It is responding. The prairie night holds no edges that need defending. There is nothing approaching, nothing retreating, only a vastness that remains steady in its openness. You continue walking, and somewhere in that continued motion, the idea of being a separate walker alongside a separate rail line begins to thin. The line is part of the prairie. You are part of the prairie. The wind moves across all of it without distinction. A sleeper beneath the rails bears a faint indentation worn smooth over years of use. You notice it briefly, a small hollow where weight has pressed repeatedly. It is almost invisible, yet unmistakable when seen closely. It does not call attention to itself. It simply exists as evidence of time. You pass it. Your steps feel lighter now, not because the ground has changed, but because the sense of carrying something has eased. There is nothing to carry here. No expectation. No arrival. The rails extend forward into darkness without demanding that you follow them to their end. They simply continue. Above, the sky's depth has reached its fullest expression. The stars are steady. The horizon is a quiet seam. The prairie is a broad, breathing surface beneath it all. You remain within that composition, not as an observer looking outward, but as a presence moving through an already complete scene. The wind brushes once more across the grasses, this time softer than before, as though even it has grown tired of motion. The land settles again. You walk. And the rhythm, rail and step, breath and sky, continues without variation, without urgency, without need. The prairie holds its line. The rails hold theirs. And you, moving quietly beside them, find that you are no longer separate from either. The prairie opens further as you continue, though it does not expand in any visible way. It is your sense of scale that shifts. The land does not move outward. It remains exactly as it is: long grasses, low swell of earth, twin rails tracing their quiet path, yet something in your perception widens to meet it. The sky above has deepened into a uniform darkness now, scattered with stars that no longer flicker but remain steady. They seem less like points of light and more like small, fixed presences, distant, patient, uninterested in spectacle. You walk beside the line. The gravel beneath your boots holds the faint memory of daytime heat, but it has cooled enough that each step feels grounded, stable, almost cushioned by the fine, shifting stones. The sound of your movement is contained. It does not echo. It does not travel. It settles quickly into the air. There is something reassuring about sound that does not linger. A stretch of grass along the right side leans slightly toward the track, as if shaped by years of wind passing in one direction. You brush against it lightly as you walk, and the stems return to place without resistance. They do not cling. The land has learned how to yield without losing form. Your shoulders lower another fraction. The body is no longer calibrating to terrain. It has absorbed the rhythm fully. Step, shift, settle, lift. The motion repeats without effort, like a quiet pulse. The rails continue their narrow gleam in the darkness, reflecting almost nothing now. They are no longer lines of brightness. They are silhouettes against the open field, two continuous strokes that do not question where they laid. You begin to feel less like you are walking beside them, and more like you are moving within the same direction they hold. There is no hurry in that alignment. A distant coyote call threads briefly through the night, low and single, then gone. It does not break the stillness. It adds a contour to it, a reminder that the prairie breathes beyond what you see. The air carries that sound for only a moment before it thins. You continue. The horizon is no longer defined by color. It is defined by absence, the place where the darkness of earth meets the darkness of sky without contrast. It feels seamless. There is something calming about a horizon that does not divide. Your breathing has slowed to match the steadiness of your steps. Inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth. No instruction required. The body has found its cadence. You notice a slight dip in the land ahead, a shallow trough where rainwater might gather during storms. The rails cross it without deviation, supported by sleepers that rest firmly in place. Even here, the line does not falter. You descend gently into the dip and rise again on the other side, your stride barely adjusting. The prairie does not challenge you. It accommodates. A faint metallic contraction hums through the rail near your knee as the night air cools further. It is not a sharp sound, more like a subtle realignment, steel adjusting to temperature without complaint. There is patience in material that yields quietly. The grasses shift again as wind moves across them in a low, continuous wave. You cannot see the full sweep in darkness, but you sense its path, a slow ripple that moves left to right, bending, lifting, bending again. The prairie does not resist wind, it moves with it. Your awareness begins to extend beyond the immediate path underfoot. The rails, the grasses, the horizon, the sky, all of it feels less segmented. The edges between them soften. You are not focusing on one element at a time anymore. You are sensing the whole. A short wooden marker stands near the track, worn smooth and leaning slightly to one side. You brush your fingers along its surface as you pass. The wood is cool. There is a faint groove carved near the base, perhaps once part of a number or measurement, now too softened to read clearly. Time does not erase completely. It rounds. You let your hand fall back to your side. The body continues walking, but the idea of direction has begun to loosen. You are not heading toward a station or a crossing. You are not anticipating the next landmark. You are simply within the movement. The sky above feels closer now, not because it has lowered, but because your awareness has risen to meet it. The stars no longer seem distant. They feel woven into the same field as the prairie beneath your feet. A subtle shift occurs within you, not dramatic, not abrupt, just a gentle thinning of separation. The rails are no longer something you follow. They are something you share space with. You are not beside the prairie, you are within it. A soft breeze touches your cheek and moves on. It carries the faint scent of dry earth, and something mineral, perhaps a stone exposed recently by wind. The scent does not demand attention. It simply passes through you. The land does not ask to be interpreted. It asks only to be experienced. You walk on. The rhythm of step and breath continues without commentary. Your thoughts have grown sparse, not because you forced them to quiet, but because there is less to hold onto here. No complexity, no interruption, only openness. You notice how the darkness between the stars feels as substantial as the stars themselves. It is not empty, it is full of depth, a space that holds rather than excludes. In the same way, the stretches of prairie without visible feature feel as meaningful as the rails that define your path. Nothing here competes for focus. Everything exists in balance. The gravel beneath your boots shifts again, and one small stone rolls slightly farther than the rest before settling. The sound is brief and contained. You do not look back to find it. The land has absorbed it already. Your arms swing naturally at your sides, the motion loose and uncalculated. The body no longer feels like something you are directing. It feels like something participating. The prairie has not changed. You have. The horizon remains steady. The rails remain parallel. The grasses continue their quiet conversation with the wind. Yet your sense of being separate from these elements has softened further. You are not watching the prairie breathe. You are breathing with it. A slight incline rises ahead, subtle enough that you would not have noticed earlier. Now you sense it in the gentle engagement of your calves, the shift in weight toward the balls of your feet. The incline does not strain you. It invites you upward. At the crest, you pause briefly, not stopping entirely, but allowing your pace to ease. From here, the land stretches in both directions, indistinct in darkness, yet unmistakably vast. There is something deeply steady about that. The rails continue forward, vanishing into the night without visible end. They do not announce where they laid. They simply extend. You resume walking. And as you do, the boundary between walking and being carried by the motion begins to blur. The prairie does not push you forward, but it holds you in its rhythm. The wind lowers again. The grasses settle. The night deepens one final shade, though you would struggle to name the difference. You move. The rails move with you, or perhaps you move within them. It no longer matters which. The prairie holds its form. The sky holds its depth. The line continues. And within that steady continuation, your sense of individuality thins into something softer, not lost, not erased, but gently dispersed into the wider field around you. You are no longer simply beside the rails. You are part of the quiet that carries them forward. The rails continue ahead, unbroken, their narrow silhouettes fading into the dark without ceremony. You walk beside them still, yet the sensation of walking has altered. The motion is present, but the effort behind it has thinned. The prairie does not change its shape to meet you. It remains wide, low, steady. And because it remains steady, you begin to feel steady within it. The wind moves across the grasses in a broad sweep, flattening them for a moment before releasing them back into upright lines. The sound is not sharp. It is a hush that travels outward and then dissolves. You feel that same hush move through you. There is a point, subtle, almost invisible, where movement stops being something you initiate and becomes something you inhabit. You reach that point without noticing when it happened. Your steps continue. The rails hold their quiet gleam. The sky rests above. The prairie breathes. And your awareness spreads outward, as if the boundaries of your body have become less defined, less necessary. A short wooden bridge crosses a narrow drainage cut in the land ahead. It is small, only a few planks spanning a shallow channel where rainwater might pass during storms. You step onto it without breaking stride. The wood creaks softly beneath your weight, a contained sound, old and reliable. The boards are worn smooth at the center where countless crossings have polished them over time. There is patience in surfaces that have been walked on repeatedly. You step off the bridge and return to the gravel, the small stones shifting underfoot again with their familiar whisper. Nothing here demands your attention. Nothing pulls at you. The prairie does not try to impress. It simply continues. Your breathing has become indistinguishable from the wind's slow rise and fall. Inhale, exhale, a long, even exchange. The rails hum faintly as they cool further in the night air, not a mechanical sound exactly, more a settling of metal against itself, contracting gently. It is barely audible. You sense it more than hear it. The prairie holds that sound as it holds everything else without commentary. Your shoulders ease lower. Your jaw softens. The sky seems larger now, not because it has expanded, but because you are no longer measuring it. The stars remain scattered in quiet constellations, distant and unwavering. They do not flicker in competition. They simply remain. You realize you are no longer thinking about where the rails lead. The idea of destination has fallen away entirely. The land beneath you rises and dips in long, shallow arcs. Each incline is so gradual it feels like the breathing of the earth itself, lifting you slightly, then lowering you back down. You move with it. There is no interruption in the rhythm. A faint cluster of prairie flowers, pale and nearly invisible in the dark, brushes against your hand as you pass. Their stems are slender but resilient. They bend, then return upright after you have moved on. Nothing clings, nothing resists. The prairie knows how to accommodate motion without altering its core. You begin to sense the rails less as objects and more as extensions of the land, lines drawn lightly across a vast canvas. They do not dominate the landscape. They belong to it. The same begins to feel true of you. Your outline softens in your own awareness. Not physically, you still feel the weight of your steps, the texture of gravel, the air against your skin, but the sense of separation between you and this wide place has thinned further. You are not observing the prairie. You are moving within its field. A single moth drifts briefly through your peripheral vision, pale against the dark. It circles once near the rail, then disappears into the grass. Its movement is quiet, unremarkable. Small presences come and go without shifting the balance. The wind lowers again, settling into stillness. For a moment, there is almost no sound at all, not even the whisper of grass. You continue walking. The silence does not feel empty. It feels complete. There is something grounding about silence that does not strain to be filled. Your steps remain even. The gravel's texture presses lightly through the soles of your boots, reminding you of contact with the earth below. The sensation is steady and reassuring. You notice a slight irregularity in one of the sleepers, a darker patch where wood has absorbed moisture over years, leaving a faint stain that has never quite dried to the same tone as the rest. You step across it without thought, but the detail registers briefly. Time marks surfaces quietly. It does not need to announce itself. The rails stretch onward, unwavering in their parallel path. They do not curve sharply. They do not deviate. They hold a straight, calm intention across the prairie's breadth. You feel that intention as a kind of internal alignment, not rigid, not forced, simply steady. Your awareness spreads again, expanding beyond the narrow corridor of track to include the open field on either side. The prairie at night has depth you could not see in daylight, layers of shadow, subtle variations in texture, low undulations hidden by darkness. You are not trying to catalog them. You are allowing them to exist. The sky feels closer now, not overhead, but around you. The darkness wraps gently at the edges of your perception, softening the distinction between ground and air. You walk, and the act of walking feels less like movement and more like continuity. A faint glint appears ahead, perhaps a small reflective marker near the track. As you approach, it catches starlight briefly, then dims again when your angle shifts. It does not guide you. It does not signal anything important. It simply reflects for a moment. There is something calming about light that appears without demand. You pass it. The prairie resumes its even tone. The night deepens again, though the shift is subtle, a slight lowering of contrast, a softening of what little definition remained. The rails are now darker than the gravel beside them, their edges blending gently with shadow. Your sense of self blends in the same way. You are still present. You still feel your steps, your breath, the weight of your body. But the emphasis on that presence has lessened. You are not separate from the prairie. You are another quiet movement within it. The wind returns briefly, lifting the grasses in a long sweep that travels outward like a ripple in water. You watch the ripple pass across the field without trying to follow its end. The prairie does not hold onto motion. It allows it to pass through. You do the same, your stride remains consistent. The rhythm of step and breath continues without adjustment. The rails carry their silent line forward. There is no sense of beginning or ending here, only continuation. And within that continuation, your awareness settles deeper, not into sleep yet, but into a place where the edges of thought blur and the landscape becomes both external and internal at once. The prairie holds its form. The rails remain. The sky watches without judgment, and you move within it all, no longer measuring the distance, no longer marking time, only existing within the steady, unbroken field of night. The boundary between walker and land has grown, so light it feels almost transparent. Not gone, just permeable. You continue beside the rails, but the sense of beside has softened into within, and the prairie carries that softness forward with you. The prairie widens again without visibly changing. It has always been wide. Only your awareness of it shifts, stretching, loosening, expanding into spaces you were not previously noticing. The rails remain beside you, though they no longer feel like objects you are following. They are simply two quiet lines resting in the land. Their presence is steady, but not insistent. You move within their quiet geometry. The night has deepened into a fuller darkness now. The last trace of horizon glow has thinned into something almost imperceptible. The sky feels less like a ceiling and more like depth. You feel depth within yourself in the same way. The wind travels lower across the grasses, closer to the earth. It does not rush. It does not carry urgency. It moves as if it has all the time in the world. You recognize that feeling. Time no longer feels segmented. It does not divide into before and after. It stretches gently, evenly, like the rails themselves, uninterrupted, calm. Your steps remain consistent. Gravel shifts, fabric brushes against fabric. Breath enters and leaves. There is no need to narrate what is happening. The prairie is not asking for interpretation. It exists without commentary. You exist the same way. A small dip in the land brings you briefly lower than the surrounding field. The grasses here are taller, their tips brushing lightly against your sleeve. The contact is soft and transient. You do not slow. The stems part, then return upright after you pass. There is something reassuring about landscapes that restore themselves so easily. You rise again out of the shallow hollow. The sky appears wider from this slight elevation, though the difference is minimal. The stars remain scattered without emphasis, their light patient and distant. You are no longer cataloging them. You are simply within their quiet company. The rails hold a faint coolness in the air. Even without touching them, you sense the metal's temperature lowering further as the night settles. A subtle contraction hums through their length, not audible in a sharp way, but felt as a contained presence. The prairie absorbs that sound. Your body absorbs it too. Your awareness is no longer centered behind your eyes. It has broadened, diffused outward into the space around you. The distinction between inside and outside has softened into something more porous. You are walking, yes, but you are also being carried by the rhythm of the land. The grasses lean again in a slow collective motion, bowing toward the same direction before easing upright. The sound they make is not singular. It is layered, 1,000 small contacts brushing against one another. It settles quickly. A short sentence lands gently. You continue. The rails, the gravel, the field, they form a simple composition. Nothing ornate, nothing dramatic. The simplicity is what allows your mind to release its need for edges. You pass a weathered signpost near the track. The paint has long since faded, its lettering nearly erased by wind and sun. It stands without instruction, without clear message. You do not pause to read it. Some markers are not meant to direct. They simply remain. The land stretches outward on both sides without interruption. There are no fences here, no boundaries dividing one parcel from another. The prairie holds itself as one continuous surface. Your awareness mirrors that continuity. Thoughts, if they appear at all, do not linger. They drift through like the wind, brief movements across an otherwise even field. You notice a faint warmth lingering in the earth beneath your steps, the residue of daylight still releasing slowly from soil and stone. It is subtle but steady. Even as the air cools, the ground remembers. You feel that memory without naming it. The rails carry on ahead, narrowing in perspective, but never truly meeting. Their parallel steadiness has become less an object to observe and more a pattern that supports your drift. Parallel lines do not compete, they coexist. The prairie holds a quiet dignity in that coexistence. There is no struggle for dominance between sky and land, between grass and stone, between rail and earth. Each element occupies its place without tension. You begin to feel that same absence of tension within your own body. Your shoulders are no longer lifted. Your hands rest loosely at your sides. Your breathing remains slow and even, not measured, not controlled, simply present. The soundscape has simplified further. The wind is softer now. The grasses whisper less. The rails have ceased their faint, settling hum. The prairie holds a near stillness that feels intentional without being deliberate. Silence does not need explanation. You walk into that silence, and something within you settles deeper. The sense of self that once felt defined, skin, muscle, bone, has softened into a more spacious awareness. You are still contained within your body, but the emphasis on containment has faded. You are part of the field, part of the horizon, part of the slow cooling earth. A single distant call, perhaps from a night bird, rises briefly and then fades. It does not echo. It does not repeat. It simply passes through the open air. Moments like that do not disturb the prairie's equilibrium. They enrich it. You continue walking, but walking now feels less like forward motion and more like gentle presence. The rails no longer guide you, they accompany you. The prairie no longer surrounds you, it includes you. Your thoughts have grown sparse. The mind does not search for structure here, it rests. There is a subtle shift in the air, a slightly cooler current brushing across your face. It carries the scent of dry grass and distant soil, a scent that is neither sweet nor sharp, just grounded. You inhale without effort. The sky feels lower now, though it has not moved. The darkness presses closer to the land in a way that feels protective rather than enclosing. You are not beneath the sky, you are within the night. The rails fade further into shadow as you move. Their outlines blur at the edges, merging gently with the gravel beside them. The prairie's texture has grown softer to your eyes, less defined, and your awareness has followed that softening. You are no longer focused on the details of each step. The motion continues, but it no longer requires your full attention. The prairie holds you. The land's evenness seeps into your muscles, into your breath, into the quiet rhythm of your pulse. A small patch of taller grass bends more dramatically as the wind shifts direction. For a moment, the blades lean fully toward you, then return upright as the air passes. It is a slow exchange. Nothing clings. You move past it without disturbance. The rails persist beside you, but their significance has dissolved. They are no longer path, no longer destination, only lines resting on earth. The prairie remains wide and unbroken. Your awareness mirrors that unbroken field. There is no tension pulling you forward, no need to reach, no reason to turn back, only the steady presence of night and land and breath. Your steps continue lighter now, less deliberate. The gravel feels softer underfoot, or perhaps your attention to it has thinned. You are moving, but movement has become secondary. Being has taken its place. The prairie does not hurry toward dawn. It does not anticipate change. It holds the night fully. You hold it too, and in this wide, open expanse, beneath a sky that neither demands nor directs, you find yourself diffused gently into the landscape. Not erased, not lost, simply expanded. The rails carry their quiet line forward into shadow. The grasses continue their low, patient sway. The wind travels where it will, and you remain within it all, less separate than before, more at ease, your awareness stretched across the open prairie like the night itself. The prairie does not announce a transition. It does not signal that you have moved into a different phase of the night. The land simply continues in the same measured way it always has, and in that continuation, something within you begins to rest more fully. Your steps remain steady along the rails, though now the sense of walking feels almost ceremonial in its simplicity. There is no effort to it, no sense of distance being covered. The rails are no longer markers of direction. They are companions in rhythm, two quiet lines holding their shape while everything else breathes around them. The sky has deepened into a broader darkness. The stars are still present, but they no longer draw your attention individually. They feel less like points of light and more like a faint dusting across an endless surface. You are not tempted to count them. You are not tempted to interpret them. The night holds without instruction. A subtle coolness brushes across your face again, slower this time, as if the air itself is settling lower over the land. The prairie grasses answer with a small, unified murmur. It is softer than before. The sound does not travel far. It does not need to. Your breathing has matched the wind without conscious choice. Inhale, a gentle pause, exhale. The air leaves your body as evenly as it entered. Nothing is forced. Nothing is held back. You realize there is a comfort in repetition that is not mechanical. The rails remain parallel. The horizon remains level. Your steps repeat their quiet pattern, and yet none of it feels stagnant. It feels anchored. There is something reassuring about lines that do not waver. A shallow depression in the earth widens briefly beside the tracks, not a ditch exactly, but a soft indentation where water once gathered during spring rain. The soil there is slightly darker, holding the memory of moisture long evaporated. You notice it in passing, the way one notices a small crease in fabric or a dent in wood worn smooth by years. The land remembers without insisting. You continue forward, though forward no longer carries urgency. The prairie stretches in all directions without demand. The rails continue their path through it, but the idea of destination has thinned into something almost irrelevant. There is no endpoint waiting. The wind has eased further. The grasses no longer lean in broad waves, but instead tremble in smaller, quieter motions. The sound has become a whisper rather than a sweep. You pause briefly, not because you need to, but because the land feels balanced enough to allow stillness. Standing beside the rails, you feel the subtle warmth still rising from the earth beneath you. It has diminished since sunset, but it remains. The ground releases its stored heat slowly, patiently. Old warmth does not vanish all at once. Your shoulders lower another fraction. The prairie does not require vigilance. There are no sudden movements here. no shifting shadows that demand interpretation. Even the darkness feels even, like a blanket laid across the land rather than a curtain drawn abruptly. You resume walking. The gravel sounds softer now underfoot, perhaps because your pace has slowed slightly, or perhaps because your awareness has broadened enough to absorb the sound without isolating it. The rails reflect the faintest glint of starlight at certain angles, not bright enough to catch the eye, just enough to remind you of their presence. They are steady in their coolness, steady in their form. You feel steady too. There is a sense, subtle but present, that the prairie is not separate from you anymore. The distinction between observer and landscape has thinned to a quiet transparency. You are walking within the land, yes, but you are also part of its stillness. A faint clicking sound travels down the length of the track metal, adjusting to the drop in temperature. It is not sharp, it is brief, then it fades. Small adjustments are part of stability. You walk a little further before the land opens even wider. The grasses thin slightly here, revealing more of the soil beneath. The ground is firm and even. The rails stretch ahead like quiet threads drawn through fabric. You feel drawn forward not by need, but by rhythm. The night deepens, yet it does not grow heavier. It feels spacious. Air flows freely across the open field. There is no enclosure, no ceiling pressing down, just an expanse that holds you without containment. Your breath continues in its unmeasured cadence. There is something deeply restful about walking without intention, without an internal clock measuring distance or progress. The prairie does not ask you to arrive anywhere. It allows you to exist within its scale without comparison. You notice the faint scent of dry earth cooling further. It is a grounded scent, neither sweet nor sharp. It lingers low to the ground, blending with the coolness of the air. Your awareness rests there for a moment, then broadens again. The rails feel less like objects now, and more like quiet ideas, lines that exist without demanding attention. The prairie holds them easily. They do not disrupt its openness. Your own thoughts have thinned to a similar transparency. They appear, if at all, as brief shapes that dissolve almost immediately. Nothing catches, nothing lingers. You walk. The horizon remains level. The stars remain distant. The grasses move in small, patient motions. The land continues, and you continue within it. There is a softness to your perception now, not a blurring, but a widening. The edges of things feel less defined. The rails merge gently with shadow. The gravel merges with soil. The sky merges with distance. You are not trying to separate them. The prairie seems to breathe at its own pace. A long, slow expansion as wind passes over the grasses, a gentle contraction as the air settles. You feel that rhythm beneath your own breath. Inhale, exhale. The sound of your steps grows quieter still, almost absorbed by the field. The ground accepts your presence without echo. You are not disrupting anything. You are part of the continuation. A faint line of darker sky suggests where a distant cluster of clouds may be gathering, though they move too slowly to track. Their presence does not alter the night's equilibrium. They simply exist within it. As do you. There is no need to measure how long you have been walking. Time has softened into something circular, something that does not press forward in increments. The prairie has likely looked this way for decades, perhaps longer, holding its quiet horizon through countless evenings. You step within that continuity, and the sense of self that once felt contained within skin now feels more diffused, gently expanded into the night air. You are not thinking about the rails. You are not thinking about the horizon. You are simply within them. The prairie remains wide and open. The rails remain steady and parallel. The wind moves softly across the grasses, and you continue walking not towards something, not away from something, but within something that has always been steady, always been patient, always been here. The land continues. You remain within it, and there is nothing further required. The prairie does not close when you stop walking. It does not fold inward or dim in response to your stillness. It simply continues, wide and level, as though movement and rest are equal states within its rhythm. You find yourself standing once more beside the rails, though now the idea of standing feels almost indistinguishable from the act of being held. The ground beneath your boots is firm, gently cooled by the night air. It offers quiet support without drawing attention to itself. The rails stretch in both directions, disappearing into darkness that feels neither empty nor full. They remain as they have always been steady lines through open land, but their presence no longer feels directional. They feel like part of the landscape's breath. The sky above has deepened into a broader velvet tone. The stars are less distinct now, not because they have faded, but because your gaze no longer isolates them. They exist as a field rather than as points, a faint shimmer across the expanse. There is no need to count them, no need to track them. The wind passes again, lighter this time, barely stirring the grasses at your ankles. The sound it makes is small, a dry whisper that rises and settles without drama. It is enough. Your breathing follows that same pattern. Inhale, a quiet expansion. Exhale, a gentle settling. You do not need to regulate it, it regulates itself. A distant insect hums briefly, then falls silent. The sound is so faint it might almost be imagined, but it carries a contained certainty, a reminder that life continues in subtle forms across the prairie. You are part of that continuation. The rails give a faint metallic adjustment once more, a small, contained shift as temperature lowers further. The sound travels only a short distance before dissolving into the open air. Even metal adapts to night. Your shoulders release another fraction. It is not dramatic. It is not a decision. It is simply the body recognizing that nothing here requires vigilance. The prairie does not ask you to watch for anything. It does not require interpretation. It holds its shape and allows you to rest within it. You take a slow breath and let your gaze drift along the horizon one final time, not to search, but to acknowledge its steadiness. The line where earth meets sky feels patient. It does not rush toward darkness. It receives it gradually. There is something reassuring about land that does not hurry. The grasses have settled almost completely now. Their movement is minimal, a slight tremor when air brushes across them, then stillness again. The field appears less textured, more unified, a broad surface under a broad sky. You feel similarly unified, not as a figure standing within the prairie, but as part of its quiet. The rails beneath your hand are cool now, fully surrendered to the night air. They no longer hold any trace of warmth from the day. Their surface feels level, consistent, uninterrupted. You release them gently. There is no need to follow their path further. You are already within the rhythm they represent. The earth beneath your feet feels solid and unmoving. And yet beneath that solidity lies motion, tectonic patience, slow rotation, the turning of a planet beneath open sky. You do not feel that motion. You do not need to. It carries you without effort. A faint scent rises once more, dry grass and distant soil, cooled into a muted blend. It settles low in the air, subtle but grounding. You let it pass through your awareness. There is no need to hold it. Your arms rest easily at your sides. Your breath remains unforced. The night has reached its stable equilibrium, not early evening, not yet morning. A middle space where everything simply exists as it is. The prairie does not shrink in darkness. It expands. The sky does not close overhead. It deepens. And you remain exactly where you are meant to be, not at a destination, not at a threshold, but within a field that has already accepted you. The idea of walking further fades gently. It does not feel like a choice to stop. It feels like the natural completion of a cycle. Movement has softened into presence. Presence has softened into quiet. A single star brightens slightly, then dims again, not dramatically, just enough to shift the balance of the sky for a moment. You notice it without fixating. Small changes continue. The prairie continues. The rails continue. And the part of you that once measured distance or progress has grown very still. There is nothing here that demands interpretation, nothing that needs adjustment. The land remains open. The air remains cool. The horizon remains level. You allow your awareness to widen one final time, not outward, but evenly in all directions at once. The grasses, the rails, the sky, the faint sounds, the cooled earth beneath you, they exist in a single, continuous field. And you are not separate from that field. You are already within it. The night gathers more fully now, but without heaviness. It settles over the prairie like a natural extension of the land itself. There is no boundary between ground and darkness. They blend, your breathing grows slower. Not by effort, by alignment. The prairie does not shift. The rails do not shift. The wind moves softly and then rests again. The world continues as it always has, broad, patient, unhurried. You do not need to follow it. You are already within it. The prairie continues as it always has. Its rhythm remains. You do not need to follow it. You are already within it. The night gathers, the quiet holds, and the rest will carry it.